Chapter 46. Lu Shu had thought about it before, that with its godly effects, the quickest way to earn money was definitely from the refresher fruit. For now, he was able to get his hands on both the celestial and refresher fruits relatively easily, but he had yet to experiment with the celestial fruit. Unable to ascertain whether it had effects on others, Lu Xiaoyu was unable to help him understand its power better as she had not started her training yet. Well, the only option left was the refresher fruits. If he was able to sell them, it was certain that countless would desire it. Boosting their aptitudes and physical conditions, the wealthy would definitely purchase them to ensure their own well-being as well as their families. As such, Lu Shu was certain that many were willing to do just that. But the problem was that the refresher fruit would start to expire about 6 hours after it was taken out of his inventory. Unsure of the total time it would last before vanishing, it removed his option of mailing it to others. And furthermore, powerful figures could still track him down even if he did not include his address from all of the tiny, minute details left behind. For example, they could track down the one who delivered the file, have experts identify his handwriting, and even investigate the traffic surveillance camera. It was a fact that there was nothing money couldn't do. It was worth the effort for many as long as they could get their hands on the refresher fruits. Not being able to mail it, a face-to-face transaction was even more unviable. It was laughable to think that they would just simply leave after purchasing the fruit from Lu Shu. They would most likely force him to tell them where these fruits had originated from. Stating that they grew them from a tree would be too unbelievable unless his customers were to buy his story. In order to get the truth out from him, they would have to torture him or else, he may never say it. Not to generalize that the entire governmental system was repulsive, but the fact remained that there would definitely be a few corrupted individuals within the system. Especially in such a time where the society is in a turmoil due to the current metahuman situation, it would be quite understandable for those influential individuals to be plotting some ideas to benefit themselves. Metahumans currently were still unable to be assembled and be used as troops in war, but what about using them as bodyguards? Even the iron sand palm martial artists would not even hold a candle to them, and their martial arts may just be considered a joke in front of their prowess. Lu Shu pondered about the different paths that metahumans could take in the future, and there were way too many to be considered. Becoming a celebrity and raking in the money was the best possibility, but becoming a genius surgeon with enhanced concentration was another great path to take as well. Such a surgeon who makes no mistakes in surgeries would have the entire country queuing up for his services. Although being the first to be noticed by others, combat abilities were not the only useful powers out there. Regardless of how others were getting along, and whether or not he would be able to find a suitable method of earning money for himself in the future, Lu Shu felt that the only thing which mattered was to get stronger. It would probably open an even more lucrative path for him to take, but for now, he could only rely on his stinky tofus. At least it's much easier than selling eggs, wasn't it? To run his business, selling those eggs involved restocking of the goods all by himself. In the event that the eggs in the market at his place cost 10 cents more, Lu Shu would have to travel 2 kilometers away to another supermarket just to purchase them. The small details when accumulated would become significant, and 10 cents wasn't something he could dismiss that easily. Based on the number of eggs he sold a day, the amount of money he could save from those numerous 10 cents would be able to get Lu Xiaoyu a roasted sweet potato or something else. Craving sweet potatoes in the winter and ice cream in the summer, there was always something she had wanted to eat. Because of that, Lu Shu had to wake up at 5 in the morning just to purchase eggs from the markets. Those morning markets also had homegrown eggs which tasted better and at times were relatively cheaper. To sell stinky tofu instead, he could save up more by skipping this stocking process, and in addition, cooking those eggs required water, electricity and gas, all of which were resources he could stop paying for. Jumping with joy from his thoughts, he was barely able to contain himself. For an orphan like Lu Shu, his ability to maintain a positive attitude even though he had to support himself has helped him to live on. He had already encountered few of the worst misfortunes in life, and having a lack of optimism might make it difficult for him to carry on living. He was tricked yet another time by the mischief system, but looking on its bright side, Lu Shu was at peace again. His stinky tofu was even smellier than the ones he had in the past, but they were even more authentic and tasty. Some people loved stinky tofu so much that even just the smell of it was enough to stop them in their tracks. If there were such customers, the taste of his stinky tofu would definitely turn them into his regular customers. To say that the system had fooled him badly wasn't exactly true. Lu Xiaoyu wanted Lu Shu to use his abilities to create a crate for her after she had finished her portion of stinky tofu, and as expected, she was mercilessly shot down by Lu Shu. The next morning, Lu Shu carried a huge box out of his house. That box was once used to carry his belongings during his house moving but was now useful in containing the stinky tofu. He had to retrieve the stinky tofu from his inventory at home since it would be odd if he was to magically make them appear in front of his customers. Luckily, he wasn't crazy enough to do that yet. Had it been the old Lu Shu previously, he would not have been able to lift up that box which contained 20+ portions of stinky tofu. However, it was just a simple task for him currently. Of course, even though he could manage that with just one hand, he had to pretend that at least some effort was needed. Arriving at the destination to set up his store, the boss of a breakfast shop adjacent to his was delighted to see Lu Shu. "You're here, Shu, want a bowl of spicy pepper soup?" Lu Shu smiled and shook his head. "Thanks, Uncle Li, but I've already eaten at home." "Why is Lu Xiaoyu not here today?" "That little girl will sit endearingly in a corner when selling those eggs for you and they would be sold out instantly," as Uncle Li quipped. He had admired Lu Xiaoyu as she could sit there without uttering a single word and her business would still be booming. Lu Shu raised his eyebrows. How was Lu Xiaoyu endearing? That little girl was a mischievous devil and she really did know how to put on a show. Before the market was built, this location was utilized as a place where peddlers sold groceries and customers would gather here for produce and breakfast. But after the market was built, the town council management would patrol this area daily, restricting the peddlers' livelihood. The government policies came shortly after which slowly sided with the lower income groups. The city then decided to set up areas where peddlers had the permission to sell their produce and breakfast, and as a result, the place became lively once again. Since most of those who sold groceries have shifted over to the market, only those who sold breakfast food remained. Had that not been the case, Lu Shu believed that he would always be on the run from the town council management. One had to run away for the sake of making a living and the other had to chase them down in order to preserve the town's cultural development, and both parties would not have had it easy. However, there was now no need to worry anymore, and even the town councillors liked having their breakfast here. The instant Lu Shu opened up his box, Li Guoyang, the neighboring breakfast seller, suddenly turned around. Many other neighboring store owners were not spared as they stopped for a moment as well. This smell was especially pungent. From Li Guoyang's distress, +5 +2 +1 +7. From wafting in the air, the stench from the stinky tofu attacked the nostrils of everyone. The distress points contributed by them were also fluctuating accordingly with highs and lows. Store owners all around, not only Li Guoyang, contributed to Lu Shu's distress points. Regardless of what they were selling, be it groceries, sesame balls, dough fritters, Chinese crepe or buns, everyone felt as if they were being suffocated. Chapter 47. When Lu Shu saw an entire wave of notifications coming into his records log, his eyes sparkled. When he first took out the stinky tofu, Lu Xiaoyu contributed just a few distress points to him and he did not think much about it. But from the look of it, this thing here was exactly like a weapon of mass destruction. Even though the distress points he earned from it were not very significant, but the points were coming in consistently at a high rate. Within just a minute, Lu Shu was able to harvest about 100 points. If he were to sell his products for 20 minutes, as usual, Lu Shu estimated that he would be able to harvest about 2,000 points. Furthermore, he had just pushed out his cart and there were not many passers-by. When there would be more of them passing by later, wouldn't his points explode out of control? As such, Lu Shu did not need to fear that he would win something undesirable from the lottery. Even if his reward were to be stinky tofus, it would be sort of useful to his actual life. It was considered really stinky, but it wasn't that pungent that others could not endure the smell of it. Or else, the resentment they exude would not amount to just single-digit distress points. To put it simply, it was more of a mild, prickling sense of suffering for the others. Li Guiyang thought for a while and with a mouth half opened from some minor agony, cracked a half-serious joke. Lu Shu, did Uncle Li do anything to you which you did not like recently? No, definitely not, Lu Shu quickly waved and denied. Uncle Li, who are you kidding? Within this year or so, everyone knew that Lu Shu was a self-reliant orphan and had always looked out for him. Uncle Li used to sell Chinese marbled eggs at his breakfast store which tasted decent, even though it wasn't as easy to deshell due to him not bathing the eggs in cold water. It was still undoubtedly a favorite with everyone. However, after Uncle Li had learned of Lu Shu and Lu Xiaoyu's financial situation, he had quietly stopped selling his Chinese marbled eggs. Furthermore, there were 2 other stores which followed suit. As such, Lu Shu was the only one left selling eggs on the entire street, resulting in his booming business. And whenever Lu Xiaoyu came out to sell the eggs on her own, it was these aunties and uncles who would look after her. No matter how intelligent she was, Lu Xiaoyu was still just a 10-year-old girl. There were many scoundrels out there, and if anyone were to show even a hint of animosity towards her, there would always be these folks to come to her rescue. Uncle Li and the rest would even group up and send Lu Xiaoyu home at times after they were done with their stores. These heartfelt feelings slowly accumulated. Lu Shu had always felt that unconditional love did not exist in this world since both Lu Xiaoyu's and his parents had abandoned them. If so, who else would show kindness to them? At least, that was the mentality they had when they had left the orphanage initially. It was only after some time that Lu Shu slowly realized that there were indeed virtuous people in this world where true sentiments were present and not everything was corrupt and nefarious. Lu Shu had thought about it and decided that if he were to get himself a good-paying job after his university studies, he would help out these folks with whatever they needed assistance with. This was because, in his darkest, toughest period, they were the ones who showered him with the greatest kindness he had ever experienced. To a 16-year-old who had just left the orphanage, these overwhelming warmth were like the necessary help he had needed desperately. Lu Shu was not one who unscrupulously antagonized others. At least for these folks, he would definitely not provoke them. As such, when Uncle Li had said those words, Lu Shu internalized his words and felt rather embarrassed having his distress points coming from them. Lu Shu thought for a while and in one swooping motion, brought out a few stinky tofus and planned to hand them out to everyone to try. Uncle Li, these are the stinky tofu which I made. Don't just focus on its stench, they are actually really delicious. He wondered that if everyone were to try this stinky tofu, would their distress be relieved a little? Compared to these people who displayed kindness towards him, Lu Shu would rather sacrifice a few distress points, since there were still other passers-by, and also, his adorable classmates. He brought along 1 portion for each person and each stinky tofu portion would cost him a little short of $5. Although Lu Shu was a calculative person, he was definitely not a petty one. The only problem was that these folks did not accept his offer readily and were sitting on the fence. Thus, they doubtfully took a small bite out of the stinky tofu. Delicious. Uncle Li was shocked the moment he ate it. This stinky tofu was surprisingly delicious and had a strong depth of flavor. Shu, what great culinary skills. If you had such skill, why did you not bring it out earlier? I think that this would help you earn much more than the eggs you sell. Lu Shu peeked at his income records and Uncle Li's distress points had stopped coming in. This was considered a positive situation to Lu Shu and he replied, I had just learned it and I only dared to bring it out to sell after I was confident that I have mastered it. Of course, he could not mention anything about the lottery and had to provide such an answer. After eating the stinky tofu, everyone's distress points had vanished together with Lu Shu's guilt. I will continue to sell this stinky tofu in the future, so Uncle Li and Auntie Wang, you can carry on with selling your Chinese marbled eggs. I'm sorry for holding up your business this past year or so, Lu Shu stated while smiling. Look at you, sounding as if we're strangers, replied Uncle Li happily. It was a joy to see that someone had remembered the favors you've done for them. Initially, they had only decided to help these two siblings, Lu Shu and Lu Xiaoyu, as they seemed to have rather good characters. Or else, there was no reason to help out a total stranger. Lu Shu had earned about 200 points, and although he had lost a large sum of his possible income, he felt rather contented inside. These folks of 10 over people had only consumed 3 portions of his stinky tofu, and there were still more to sell. The passers-by in the streets slowly increased as those who needed to work or go to school made their way through this place. When they walked past this area, their nostrils would normally be attacked by the fragrance of the food being prepared here: baked pancakes, fruits, peppery soups, soy milk, and various vegetable bundles. But for today, everything seemed to have changed as there was only the smell of stinky tofu in the air. Lu Shu cheerfully watched as people walked past him, causing his income records of distress points rise at breakneck speed. As long as someone was to come within 50 meters of his stall, they would immediately contribute distress points to Lu Shu until they had left the vicinity. Even though the area was not significantly huge, the main point was that there were mountains of people here. Humans for the win. Just after 10 minutes, Lu Shu had earned 3,700 points. If anyone ordinary were to see how irksome he was, they would surely cry deep inside knowing that information. But Lu Shu was not an ordinary person. He only felt a great sense of contentment upon seeing the huge income of distress points. It felt as though Lu Shu had a massive killer weapon in his grasp. He is just someone carrying a box of stinky tofu, and he could strike fear within others. Previously, he was worried that the moment everyone had eaten his stinky tofu, they would slowly halt their distress contribution. On second thoughts, that trail of thought was rather laughable, and there was no need to worry. There were thousands of people walking through the street, but his limited portions of stinky tofu only amounted to a few tens of pieces. Even if one person was to purchase just one portion, there would be no end to the queue. As such, his current stock of stinky tofu seemed negligible compared to the number of passers-by. Chapter 48. The number of distress points that could be provided by thousands of people was enormous. Previously, Lu Shu felt that this system was unreliable, only to realize that the stinky tofu was God-sent. Stinky tofu was rather mysterious. Some people avoid it at all costs, while some people love eating it to the extent that they'll get excited just by smelling it. So not everyone would be distressed by stinky tofu, so Lu Shu still had some business. One middle-aged man's eyes lit up upon walking past and smelling the stinky tofu. He turned around and looked at Lu Shu. How much does one cost? $5. Lu Shu knew that business was here. Let me try one. The middle-aged man passed $5 to Lu Shu. Lu Shu felt a tinge of joy thinking about the possible future income from this. The middle-aged man put a piece of black, stinky tofu into his mouth and licked his lips. Delicious, what an authentic taste. Lu Shu heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't eat stinky tofu, so he didn't have much confidence in this business. Now that someone enjoyed it, it showed that it was a plausible business idea. Business was like that, it was tough to merely rely on one idea. Some people say instead of doing widespread business, one should open a restaurant. But restaurants don't earn money easily. Renovation, wages of waiters and chefs, what didn't need money? It would cost thousands of dollars every day, and many people wouldn't be able to tolerate it. Just like how many people actually had some business ideas which were quite innovative and refreshing. But once they actually do it, it'll become a mess. Lu Shu was afraid he belonged to this category. His advantage, however, was that his business didn't require any money or cost. There was no need to buy ingredients or pay anyone wages. Even if this business didn't succeed, there wasn't much for him to lose, only some of his time. After the middle-aged man left, Lu Shu gained some confidence and started hollering, $5 for one stinky tofu. You'll regret not buying one for $5. Just when he finished speaking, his distress point income increased suddenly. Those people who couldn't tolerate stinky tofus were utterly annoyed. Can't you sell your stinky tofu discreetly? Don't shout. When Lu Shu had gathered 7,000 distress points, his stinky tofu gradually grew more popular. Once he reached 8,100, he had finished selling all of his tofu. Lu Shu suddenly thought deeply and hesitated. He had a high amount of distress points today because no one came to try his stinky tofu for almost half a day. Only at the end did he manage to slowly sell them. When returning customers come next time, he would finish selling his tofu quickly. He would earn money much quicker, but his inflow of distress points would be much less. He realized that the stinky tofu given by the system was too delicious, and it was also a problem. Lu Shu packed up his stall and headed home. The opening day was good, and since money was earned today, he'll leave the future problems for another day. As for the distress points, Lu Shu decided that he should think about it and explore the system. He'll decide later at night. On the way to school, Lu Shu used his phone to look at forums for any new happenings. He also looked at what the other metahumans were discussing on the chat groups. The forum had discussions on the similarities of Dao Yuan classes around the country. Everything within the country was generally the same. As for foreign countries, there was more news. Some people stated that other countries had started assembling small groups for metahumans as well. Some people said they wanted to be the guardians and defenders of the city. Some even received interviews. The media was naturally very receptive towards these metahumans who were more liberal with their thoughts. On one hand, the media wanted more news for the people. On the other hand, the metahumans craved the attention of the people. It was a match made in heaven. Regardless of whether they were sincere in wanting to defend the city, their attitude and thoughts were portrayed clearly and openly. Many people on the forum also mentioned that the appearance of metahumans was a good thing. Heroic sentiments have appeared again, and everyone was more willing to do good deeds. Maybe this might change the entire world in a good way? At least the metahumans looked rather positive and optimistic for mankind now. Lu Shu started to laugh silently when he saw all the forum comments. They were extremely childish and naive. Would those metahumans with evil sentiments tell everyone openly? "Hi, I'm about to smash the window of your house." What's the point of smashing a window? If they were to do bad things, they should be doing even worse things than smashing windows. Another heavily discussed topic involved the secrets divulged by the Dao Yuan class. More than 1,000 students in the entire country were expelled because of that. There was a huge effect, and everyone could see the determination in keeping the secret of the Dao Yuan class. Some people also noticed another situation. Metahumans' interactions within their own community wouldn't cause any expulsion. This meant that the black coats only forbid the relaying of information to commoners, but accepted the fact that metahumans interacted and shared information with each other. Someone in Li Qi's class group said, "My primary school classmate from another school just transferred over. He's a B class, and when we were chatting, he was gloating over it the entire day. He also expected me to ask him for tips and guidance for training and improvement of potential." Stop dreaming. How could you raise your aptitude? You don't even know how to train your fundamentals. At this time, a Tier B aptitude was widely understood to be powerful. The metahuman trainees all knew clearly whoever was Tier B. Those students with high aptitudes naturally had more people gathered around them. This was like a force of nature, just like how rich people often had many people crowded around them. Classifications really existed everywhere. With a difference in abilities, it was natural to have different classifications. Some people from tiers F subconsciously felt that those in B were better than them by a few tiers. Some Tier B students were more low-key, while some had a rather high profile. For example, Lu Li from sophomore class 3. He didn't look down on anyone, but he was suddenly more active and lively in school recently. He was behaving like a social butterfly recently. A social butterfly was a judgment by Lu Shu. You don't have to care, someone said, aptitude doesn't represent your future. Moreover, our school has a few people in Tier B as well, we even have a Tier A, there's no need to care about other schools. Actually, the more he gloats, the more he lacks. There's no need to care about him, let's just stay united. A few baffling statements. Due to the differences between different schools, everyone had taken up a rivalry. Lu Shu could only think that these kids were easy to pacify. Lu Shu slowly sent a new message, the more you gloat, the more it shows that what you have. The group of people in the group with a common enemy suddenly quietened down. Everyone's words seemed like they were struck by a flash back into their stomachs. Damn it. You make so much sense. Chapter 49. Actually, the saying, the better you feel about yourself, the less you feel the need to show off, made a lot of sense. Usually, the people who liked to show off did it for a sense of superiority and presence, and the really capable ones would not need to show off since these feelings came naturally. This was the logic. But yet Lu Shu said that the more you show off, that meant that you had to possess more to do so. This was not a philosophy, but it was the truth. In the gang that Li Qi had built, the gang leader was still affected by his Tier F aptitude while Lu Li had somehow been roped into it. To make things worse, Li Qingyu had been expelled and had left the gang. And so only Lu Li and Yuan Lingqi were participating in the conversation with Lu Shu. After Lu Shu had sent the message, the two of them suddenly had a feeling of déjà vu. It was just like that time in the class group chat. From Su Yuan's distress, plus 141. From Yuan Lingqi. These people were basically those of lower aptitude and they all felt like they had this common enemy and that as long as they grouped together, they did not have to be afraid of those with higher aptitudes. But Lu Shu's one deadly message caused everyone to be momentarily speechless. Those with higher aptitudes were of course fine with it, but how rare were Tier B aptitudes in the whole school. Also, not all the low aptitude students were affected by it. The message was quite subjective. But still, it was the group chat for the whole of Luocheng International School's metahuman trainees, which meant that over 70 people were in it, and in the blink of an eye, Lu Shu had earned more than 3,000 distress points. As Lu Shu was walking to school, he continued looking at the group chat with glistening eyes. If everyone continued chatting, he would be able to break through the first level of the nebula in no time. However, no one was talking. Lu Shu sent another message, why is no one replying? Come on, let's chat. Some people in the chat were mind-boggled. Lu Shu had spoilt the mood in the chat with his message and what the *T did he want them to reply? As to why no one was replying, shouldn't he be aware of the reason? From Yuan Lingqi's distress, plus 47. Another wave of distress points was added and just within the morning, Lu Shu's distress points had accumulated to over 13,000 and this was the fastest ever distress points he had received. Lu Shu was stunned speechless for a moment. Truthfully, he only wanted the conversation to continue and did not expect this much distress points. These classmates were too cute. Thinking about it, although the stinky tofu was considered a mass-affecting weapon, but unlocking future nebulas would require many more celestial fruits, and since he did not have the recipe of the stinky tofu, he should still stick to the plan of relying on and making use of the people. Arriving in class, the first thing Lu Shu did was to ask his deski Jiang Shui, the metahuman trainees from your school, did they form a gang? If you all have a group chat, can you add me in please? Jiang Shui instinctively felt that something was wrong. Bringing Lu Shu into the group would definitely result in something terrible and so he immediately rejected. Lu Shu was persistent, come on, I just want to join a group. For some reasons, the other classmates in class found it hard to communicate with Jiang Shui and thought that he was quite heartless. But Lu Shu thought otherwise, as he could always hold a normal conversation with him. Everyone had also started realizing Jiang Shui's real gender and thinking about how they had asked him for his number, and to add him to various social media, they all cringed. Everyone also noticed that this Jiang Shui was quite eccentric. In class, he seemed to only be able to hit it off with Lu Shu, and he could never speak more than 2 sentences with others. Deep down, Jiang Shui felt that although his desky Lu Shu was quite toxic, having spent a long time with him had made it more comfortable to be around him. It was a strange feeling. No matter what Jiang Shui said, Lu Shu did not judge or get offended, and the same applied to whatever Lu Shu said. Because of this, they were able to become friends. But very little people could do that. During lunchtime, Lu Shu opened his lunchbox and in it were some fried vinegar potato strips and rice. Fried vinegar potatoes were Lu Shu's specialty, which many other always failed in bringing out the sweet and sour taste, no matter how much vinegar they added. The trick to it was to soak the potato strips in vinegar before frying it, and you would achieve the flavorful potatoes. Although the local culinary industry was quite profound, there were still some dishes that were easy to figure out. But those that you can't figure out, it was impossible to replicate the same taste. Lu Shu was pondering as he ate his lunch. If I can earn $100 over or even a few $100s every day from the stinky tofu, how should I spend the money? Should I bring Lu Xiaoyu out to play on Labor Day? Or maybe summer break? Lu Xiaoyu had never been out of Luocheng, and Lu Shu had always wanted to change that. Previously, he did not have the resources to do so, but now he could. Lu Shu felt that going somewhere far on Labor Day was not as worth it, and there would also be dangerous people around during that time. During summer break, Luocheng's weather would be sweltering, but the green tea lake that Lu Xiaoyu had always wanted to go would be very cooling, and be most suitable to spend the summer. He should discuss and come up with a plan with Lu Xiaoyu that night. Even though they had some money, they should still plan out the details meticulously, as they had no other income to rely on. Lu Shu was consistently doing the day training. Although the sun rays would always merge with the flame within his heart, there were still no visible changes. The night training had a more visible progress, and Lu Shu had stayed up all night yesterday again. It was common knowledge that sleep was important, and in the winter, even waking up was a struggle. But now that he did not need to sleep, he can't help but feel strange about it. A whole night of training was equivalent to that of 1 or 2 celestial fruits, and the progress of lighting up the 6th star was at 25%. Should he buy a celestial fruit to complete lighting up the 6th star? Lu Shu felt that this was a possibility. But he was still unsure when Dao Yuan class would start teaching them about training methods. This was bound to happen, but as of now, it seemed like the objective was still to brainwash the students. They were already using extreme methods to warn the students, and as a result, most people no longer dared to breach the confidentiality regulations. What could their next move be? Chapter 50. As the night arrived, the society seemed to be unaffected by the new wave of metahumans. Countless vehicles zoomed by on the brightly colored roads during the after-work peak hour rush. While news about metahumans was still spreading, news regarding overseas metahumans forming gangs was the most common. This had become a dinner-time topic for most households. But local news related to metahumans were hardly mentioned. This should be credited to the Black Coats for being able to keep this news and informations from the public and to maintain social stability. After cooking dinner for Lu Xiaoyu, Lu Shu left for school. He wanted to celebrate and made fried eggs with eggplants. To him, it was a good thing that his awakening did not affect his daily life. Awakening did not give him an extra egg to eat, nor did it give him better clothing. But there was a slight difference now. Even though getting stinky tofu from the lottery was unlucky, Lu Shu did not mind it at all, as he could earn some money from it. Lu Shu was a very down-to-earth person. Just like that, and without stealing or causing harm, he was satisfied with earning a little money. As he flashed his night pass and entered the school, the security guards were scrutinizing everyone carefully. Even the security systems in the school were upgraded, and just a few days ago, security cameras were set up at every corner. At the entrance, even the scanning gates one would usually find at airports were set up. Being under such conditions, everyone couldn't help but become more serious. The main point here could be represented by the word ritual. For example, during a funeral, it was a ritual for everyone to wear dark-colored clothing. And doing this would also affect their moods. Right now, Luocheng International School had a totally different environment in the night compared to the day. Even Lu Shu had become a little more serious entering the school as if he was participating in some secretive mission. As the security and confidentiality surrounding the Dao Yuan class turned up a notch, the contents of the classes should be becoming more in-depth. Lessons had started and Shifei brought and distributed a box of books to the class. Lu Shu picked one up and saw The Kinship of the Three. "Is this about the training methods?" someone asked. "Not sure, but looks like it." Shifei stood on the podium and smiled at the excited students. "Did you guys think this contains the training methods?" "No, it's just the introduction." Lu Shu had a sudden realization. Because of the Dao Yuan class, he had been concerning himself with matters related to Taoism, and this, The Kinship of the Three, was written by a famous priest. If this really contained the training methods, then the black coats would not have been so secretive about things, as this book could be easily obtained. Seemed like the black coats were still paranoid about the issue of confidentiality, and by starting with the basics, they still had some time to properly manage everything. Shifei held up The Kinship of Three and asked, "Does anyone know this?" "Forget it, I'll explain directly." From Shifei's distress, +51. Lu Shu was stunned. How in the world did that situation give him distress points? Could it be that Shifei recalled the previous time he had asked Lu Shu a question and decided not to do so again? If not for the distress points, Lu Shu would not have realized. Shifei gave Lu Shu a glance and continued, "In the earliest of time, there are theories about elixirs, ancient weapons, and cultivating health techniques, but we shall leave these for later. Let's talk about the ways of the Tao first." Tao, the way that can be spoken of, is not the constant Tao, the name that can be named is not a constant name. Nameless is the origin of heaven and earth, the named is the mother of all things. Thus, the constant void enables one to observe the true essence. The constant being enables one to see the outward manifestations. These two come paired from the same origin. Shifei paused for a moment and continued, "Whether or not it's possible to achieve immortality, no one knows, but what I can assure you is that the world is now different." Lu Shu could tell that Shifei was not a trained educator and he was merely reading off the book and sharing some of his personal knowledge. 17 months ago, the world had its first changes as people started to awaken. While some people in training realized that their training methods started to produce actual results. And within the next 17 months of research, magical powers had increased and more metahumans appeared. No one had really noticed it initially, but by now, metahumans were everywhere. And someone had discovered the most efficient method of training. As of who this person was, Shifei did not mention. But Lu Shu felt that this man must be of great powers, probably at least a Class C. As Shifei had mentioned, the magical energy of the world had only been increasing and no one could predict how the future world would turn out. After the first wave of expelling students, Dao Yuan class's contents were finally becoming more relevant. Before this lesson, the students had no idea what was going on and when it all started, but now they knew. Even though the training methods were still not taught, Lu Shu felt that he had gained a lot. At this moment, Shifei took out a small bottle and inside was filled with some kind of flowing silvery white substance which glittered under the light. This is the sodium-potassium alloy. After the appearance of magical powers, some metals like this one started to develop new properties. Besides being heat-resistant, they seem to have become the medium for magical powers. Some of those in training even used them to make weapons. While Shifei was speaking, the sodium-potassium substance inside the small bottle suddenly started glowing. Lu Shu was shocked. Could this be the legendary ingredient to make those magical items? He did not really know what kind of items could be beneficial to those in training, but there was this weird vibe to the science behind this. Shifei laughed. Of course, we are not talking about all those magical items in fairy tales. Although I have not seen those items, I believe that they do exist somewhere in this world, and in fact, some would be even more magical.
What does it mean to be happy? 'Cause it looks like we all don't know. Glass half full or empty, man, we just putting on a show. Try to look to the heavens.